For over 5 millennia, the Indian subcontinent has operated under a very specific historical rule. Waves of nomadic tribes, armies, and conquerors poured across its borders looking for riches. But rather than erasing native culture, the land swallowed them whole. Long before those invasions began, the Indus River Valley supported one of the planet's first great urban societies. At its peak, around 2600 BC, up to 5 million people lived in hundreds of planned cities with stone architecture and complex infrastructure. As the climate shifted, these populations migrated deeper into the subcontinent, laying a deeply rooted cultural foundation. When the nomadic Vedic peoples arrived from Central Asia around 1500 BC, they drove chariots into the Ganges River Valley, built agricultural communities, and permanently settled the land. They embedded their customs permanently into the region. They brought horses and ironworking, composed the religious texts, the Vedas, introduced the Sanskrit language, and established the caste system. This set a pattern that would repeat for thousands of years. Invaders would arrive with superior weapons or new technologies, but eventually they would synthesize with the local population. If you conquered India, India eventually conquered your culture. The ultimate test of this assimilation engine came in the 16th century with the arrival of the Mughal Empire. Sweeping down from Central Asia with a blend of Turk-Mongol warrior culture and an Islamic faith, they established themselves as the rulers of northern India. But under leaders like Akbar the Great, the Mughals chose integration over isolation. Akbar took a Hindu wife, abolished the heavy taxes traditionally levied on non-Muslims, and hosted open debates where Hindus, Jains, Christians, and Zoroastrians could freely discuss their beliefs. Instead of exporting the subcontinent's riches back to Central Asia, the Mughals funneled their vast wealth into the local landscape. They built hospitals, palaces, and mausoleums like the Taj Mahal, cementing their legacy in stone. Over 3 centuries, the Mughals ceased to be an occupying force. They lived, ruled, and died in India. They became Indian. Then came the British East India Company. Armed with advanced sailing ships and gunpowder, they avoided massive frontal invasions. They exploited fractured local politics and leveraged superior technology to slowly absorb the entire subcontinent. The British explicitly broke the 5,000-year rule. They had no intention of assimilating. They isolated themselves in walled-off districts, strictly controlled interactions with the local population, and formally banned Indians from holding high offices in the civil service. Even the celebrated British infrastructure was built for extraction. The tens of millions of pounds spent on thousands of miles of railroads laid through the sweat of Indian laborers were designed to move raw materials like cotton, jute, and tea out to the ports, not to connect the people who produce them. To maintain control over a massive population with a tiny fraction of manpower, the British implemented a legal strategy of divide and rule. They established entirely separate systems of justice and applied different laws to Hindus and Muslims, formalizing a barrier between the two groups. This deep cultural alienation finally hit a breaking point in 1857. Rumors that standard-issue rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat deeply offended the religious beliefs of Hindu and Muslim soldiers alike. The resulting Sepoy Rebellion left hundreds of thousands dead, dissolved the East India Company, and brought the subcontinent under the direct control of the British Crown. By refusing to integrate, isolating themselves in compounds, and enforcing strict racial and cultural divides, the British achieved something entirely unintended. They forged a unified Indian national consciousness. That consciousness needed a voice, and it found one in the Indian National Congress. Initially formed in 1885 by educated elites, it quickly grew into a massive political forum that demanded the British listen to the people they were ruling. The movement gained critical momentum under Mahatma Gandhi. He introduced a tactic called satyagraha, a strict philosophy of nonviolent economic non-cooperation. By convincing Indians to stop buying imported British goods and refuse basic compliance, he struck directly at the economic model that kept the empire running. The peak of this strategy arrived in 1930, when the British imposed exorbitant taxes on salt, a basic necessity. Gandhi led a peaceful 240-mile walk to the sea to boil his own salt from the ocean. Millions of people across the country followed his lead, openly defying the law. The independence movement worked because it targeted the exact vulnerability of the British presence. The British were isolated, outnumbered extractors. Without the cooperation of the Indian people, their colonial machines simply couldn't function. Bled dry by the Second World War and facing overwhelming opposition, the British announced their withdrawal in 1947. But the legacy of their divide and rule tactics exacted a heavy toll. The subcontinent was fractured, partitioned into a Hindu-majority India and a Muslim-majority Pakistan. Because the newly drawn borders were messy and imprecise, millions of families suddenly found themselves on the wrong side of the line. Around 15 million people were forced to move across India and Pakistan in one of the largest, most violent mass migrations in human history. Yet out of that tragedy, a new republic was born. On the night of August 14, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru addressed a newly independent, democratic nation. For the first time in centuries, the people of the subcontinent were reclaiming their own destiny. Modern India is a survivor. It is a nation forged by its capacity to absorb and synthesize thousands of years of empires, and defined by its ultimate strength to expel the one empire that refused to belong.